The first thing the Duke of Blackwood noticed was the cold. It was not the chill of the pre-dawn hour, a familiar companion in the vast stone house, but a specific, personal coldness. It radiated from the empty space beside him in the great bed, a hollow in the mattress where his wife's warmth should have been. He reached a hand across the damask sheets, his fingers finding only cool, undisturbed linen. Alistair sat up. The fire in the grate had died to a faint orange pulse, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. He was a man accustomed to order, to the predictable rotation of the seasons and the reliable turning of the world on its axis. The Duchess, Eleanor, was part of that order. She was quiet. She was present. She was his wife. She was never, in the 2 years of their marriage, absent from their bed when he awoke. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the chill of the floorboards seeping through the soles of his feet. He did not call for her. The silence of the room felt deliberate, a statement in itself. He walked to her dressing room, the door ajar. Inside, everything was immaculate. Her silver-backed brushes lay aligned on the vanity, her scent, of lavender and clean linen, faint in the air. But her dressing gown was not on its hook. Her slippers were not by the chair. And on the polished surface of the mahogany dressing table, propped against her jewellery box, was a letter. Beside it, a single pearl earring lay like a shed tear. He recognized it as one of a pair he had given her on their first anniversary. A gift of duty, accepted with a quiet nod he had mistaken for gratitude. He had not seen her wear them since. Alistair picked up the envelope. It was addressed simply, Blackwood. Not Alistair. Not my husband. The formality was a blade. His hands, usually so steady whether holding reins or a pen, felt clumsy as he broke the seal. The paper was heavy, the ink black and precise. Her handwriting, like everything about her, was neat and controlled. The letter was not long. My Lord Duke, I have taken my leave of your house. I find I can no longer occupy the position you have assigned to me. You require a Duchess who is a quiet and decorative convenience. I have endeavoured to be so, but the effort has become an expense I can no longer afford. It has cost me the person I was, and I wish to see if she can be recovered. My personal effects, which are few, have been sent to a separate address. The Blackwood jewels are in the safe, the key to which is on your desk. I have taken nothing that was not mine before our marriage, save for the clothes on my back. I trust the solicitor will find my departure uncomplicated. I do not expect you to understand, nor do I require it. I require only my freedom. I wish you a peaceful life. Eleanor. He read it once, then again. The words were simple, factual, and utterly devoid of the emotion he might have expected. There was no rage, no sorrow, no pleading. There was only a calm, devastating finality. The position you have assigned to me. A quiet and decorative convenience. The phrase was a direct echo, a mirror held up to a moment he had thought unobserved. He felt a sickening lurch in his gut, the feeling of a man stepping off a cliff he had not seen in the dark. The letter did not break him with histrionics. It dismantled him with the quiet, irrefutable truth. The sun was not yet a rumour on the horizon, but his world, the one he had so carefully constructed on a foundation of cool indifference, had already fractured beyond repair. He looked again at the single pearl on the vanity, an incomplete set, a silent, damning accusation. He closed his hand around it, the smooth surface cold against his skin, and stood alone in the silent room as the first grey light of dawn began to stain the window. The house was vast, silent, and for the first time in his life, truly empty. Eleanor had learned the art of invisibility early. It was a skill honed in a household run by a widowed father, a man lost in the intricate lines of his maps, who loved his daughter dearly, but often forgot she was in the room. She learned to move quietly, to manage the accounts without announcement, to ensure the larder was full and the fires lit as if by magic. She had a mind for systems, for the hidden architecture that allowed a life or a household to function. When the proposal came from the Duke of Blackwood, it was a surprise to everyone but her father. He saw it as a solution. She saw it as a different sort of system to manage. She had no illusions about love. The Duke was still a figure of tragic romance in the broadsheets, the man publicly jilted by the beautiful Lady Annalise Finch 5 years prior. His heart was a fortress, and he was not offering her a key. He was offering her a title and a position in exchange for her quiet presence and the eventual production of an heir. She had accepted. At Blackwood Manor, she applied her old skills to a new, grander scale. The Duke gave her the household accounts, and she balanced them to the penny, finding efficiencies the previous Duchess had never bothered to seek. He saw the result, a healthier bottom line, and nodded his approval, never asking about the process. He did not see her poring over the ledgers late at night, cross-referencing suppliers, renegotiating contracts with a politeness that masked an iron will. He gave her the gardens as her domain, and she took to them not as a place for arranging flowers, but as a complex ecosystem. She found the estate's forgotten arboretum, a relic of the third Duke's passion for botany, overgrown and neglected. Armed with old journals from the library, she began the slow work of restoration. She learned the names of the trees, the cycles of their growth, the diseases that plagued them. She spent hours in the glasshouses, tending to delicate seedlings, her hands in the soil. The head gardener, a man named Mr. Thorne, who had been initially suspicious of her interest, became her silent co-conspirator. He saw her knowledge and her dedication, and a quiet, respectful alliance was formed. Her greatest unseen project was the land itself. The Duke was a meticulous landlord in theory, but his attention was on rents and crop yields, the grand arithmetic of the estate. Eleanor, walking the grounds for hours each day, saw the details. She saw the creeping damp in the walls of the tenant farms in the lower valley, the way the stream flooded the north pasture every spring. She found the old survey maps in the archives, some dating back a century, and began to study them. Her father had taught her cartography, the language of the land written in ink. She saw where an old drainage system had collapsed, where a forgotten culvert was blocked. She began to draw new maps, overlays of the old and the new, her fine pen documenting the problems with a clarity the land agents' reports lacked. She spoke to the tenants, not as a duchess making a charitable visit, but as a practical woman seeking information. They were wary at first, but her questions were specific, her interest genuine. She did not promise grand solutions. She listened. She took notes. She made plans. All of this was her own world, built in the quiet spaces of her life, in the hours when the Duke was in London or shut away in his study. He saw her walk the grounds and assumed she was taking the air. He saw her in the library and assumed she was reading novels. He never once asked what was in the books she read, or what she saw on her walks. She was a fixture in his house, elegant and silent, and he looked at her without ever truly seeing her at all. The wound that finally broke her silence was inflicted not with a shout, but with a whisper. It was a Tuesday in October. The autumn rains had begun, and the house felt damp and enclosed. Alastair's sister, Lady Beatrice, was visiting. Beatrice was a woman who wore her opinions like jewelry, sharp and prominent. She had never approved of the marriage, finding Eleanor's bloodline thin and her manner unnervingly placid. Eleanor was arranging late roses in the morning room when she heard their voices from the adjoining library. She had been about to enter to ask if they required tea, but Alastair's tone made her pause behind a heavy velvet curtain of the doorway. "She is well enough, I suppose," Beatrice was saying, her voice carrying easily. "But Alastair, there is no life in her. Does she ever speak? Does she have a single thought in that pretty, quiet head?" Eleanor stood, frozen, the stem of a rose clutched in her hand. A thorn pricked her thumb, a tiny, sharp pain. She waited for Alastair's defense, a mild one, perhaps, a polite correction. The silence stretched. Then, his voice, low and weary, the sound of the man making a tired, final assessment. "She is a convenience, Beatrice. That is all I required, and that is what she provides. After Annalise, I had no appetite for passion. I needed a duchess to manage the household and sit at my table. She does both, and she does them without fuss. It is a perfectly acceptable arrangement. She is a quiet piece of furniture, and I find I have a taste for quiet furniture." A quiet piece of furniture. The words landed not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock. It was not the insult that undid her, but the truth of it. It was a perfect, precise summation of her existence in his life. All her unseen work, all her quiet efforts to bring order and life to the neglected corners of his world, were invisible. He saw only the smooth, polished surface she presented, and he was content with it. He did not want to know what lay beneath. In that moment, something within her settled into a cold, hard certainty. She was not angry. Anger was a hot, useless emotion. She was resolved. She did not move from behind the curtain until she heard them leave the library and go out towards the stables. She walked back to the morning room and looked at the half-finished arrangement of roses. Her hands were perfectly steady. She finished placing the last rose, her movements economical and precise. She looked at the finished vase, a composition of beauty and thorns. Then she went upstairs to her room. She did not weep. She sat at her desk and took out a piece of paper. She thought of the maps she had been drawing, the complex, living systems of the estate. She had been trying to mend his world. Now, she would draw a map for herself, a line leading away from Blackwood Manor. The decision, once made, was a strange sort of peace. She would finish her work here, put everything in order, and then she would leave. She would leave without a word of recrimination, because he had already stated the truth of their marriage so clearly. There was nothing left to say. She would simply remove the piece of furniture he no longer required. Her departure was a model of the quiet efficiency with which she had lived her life at Blackwood. Over the next 3 weeks, she finalized her plans. She wrote to a distant cousin of her mother's, a widow who lived in a small cottage on the Dorset coast, and supplemented her income by taking in boarders. She wrote to Mr. Thorne, the head gardener, leaving him detailed instructions for the overwintering of the Arboretum's most fragile specimens, along with the journals she had compiled. She finished the last of her survey maps of the lower valley, bundling them with a neat report on the drainage issues and leaving the package on the land agent's desk, where it would be found in due course. It was an act of professional courtesy, not of lingering affection. A problem identified should have its solution documented. The night she chose to leave, the Duke was in London for a series of political meetings. His absence was a mercy. It allowed her to move without subterfuge. She packed a single trunk with her father's books, her drawing instruments, and the plain clothes she had brought with her to the marriage. Everything else, the gowns, the furs, the jewels, she left behind. They were the costume for a role she would no longer play. Her last act was to walk through the silent house. She paused in the library, running a hand over the spines of the books she had catalogued. She stood for a moment in the grand ballroom, where she had presided over gatherings with a placid smile, feeling utterly separate from the glittering scene around her. Finally, she went to her dressing room. She sat at the vanity and removed the pearl earrings from their box. He had given them to her with a perfunctory, "These are appropriate for a duchess." She had understood. They were not a gift of love, but of station. She took one earring and placed it on the polished wood. The other she held in her palm. It was a small, cold weight. She would keep it, not as a memento, but as a reminder. A reminder of the cost of being an object. She wrote the letter, her pen moving swiftly across the page. Each word was chosen with care, a distillation of 2 years of silence. When it was done, she propped it where he would not miss it. She did not look back at the grand bedroom, at the bed she had shared with a stranger. She walked down the main staircase, her footsteps making no sound on the thick runner, and let herself out a side door. The night air was cold and clean. A carriage she had arranged for was waiting at the end of the drive. As it pulled away, she looked back at the dark mass of Blackwood Manor, a monument of stone and shadow. She felt not sadness, but a profound and quiet relief. She was no longer the Duchess of Blackwood. She was Eleanor, and she was on her way to find out what that meant. Her new life began in a cottage smelling of salt and wood smoke. Her cousin, Mrs. Elspeth Croft, was a woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by work. She asked no questions, simply showed Eleanor to a small, clean room under the eaves, with a window that looked out over the turbulent grey sea. For the first week, Eleanor did little but walk the coastline, letting the wind and the cry of the gulls scour the last 2 years from her soul. The scale of the world here was different. There were no grand facades, no polite conversations that meant nothing. There was the sea, the sky, the rock, and the hardy, wind-bent vegetation that clung to it. It was a landscape of resilience, and she drew strength from it. Soon, her innate need for purpose asserted itself. She learned that a retired professor of botany from Oxford, a Mr. Abernathy, lived nearby. He was compiling a comprehensive illustrated flora of the Dorset coast, but his eyesight was failing, and his hand was no longer steady enough for the fine detail work. Mrs. Croft arranged an introduction. Mr. Abernathy was a curmudgeonly man, suspicious of amateurs, but when Eleanor showed him a few of her father's botanical drawings, and then one of her own, a quick, precise sketch of a sea holly she'd found on the beach, his skepticism softened. He tested her, asking her to render the intricate vein patterns on a kelp frond. She sat for 2 hours in his cluttered study, the scent of drying plants and old paper filling the air, and drew with a focused intensity she had not felt in years. When she was finished, he held the drawing up to the light, peering at it through a magnifying glass. "The hand is steady," he grunted, "and the eye is clear. You see the structure, not just the shape." He hired her on the spot. Her work was to illustrate the specimens he collected, creating the precise, detailed plates for his book. The pay was modest, but it was hers. She had earned it, not with her name or her station, but with her skill. Each day she would walk to his house, her satchel of pens and brushes over her shoulder, and lose herself for hours in the beautiful, complex architecture of the natural world. She was not a duchess. She was a botanical illustrator, and for the first time since she was a girl in her father's study, she felt she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Alistair's first instinct was to command, to send agents, to have her found and brought back. It was the response of a man whose will was rarely questioned, but the letter stopped him. I do not expect you to understand, nor do I require it. Her words had stripped him of his authority. He could force her return, but to what? A house she had willingly fled, a marriage she had so calmly renounced. He would be bringing back a body, not a wife. The quiet piece of furniture would have become a prisoner, and even he could not stomach the thought of that. For the first time, he was forced to consider not what he wanted, but what she had done, and why. The first hint that her absence was more than a social inconvenience came a week later. The land agent, Mr. Davies, requested an urgent meeting. He was a capable man, but he was flustered. Your Grace, it's the tenants in the lower valley. They refuse to pay the autumn rent. They say the drainage agreement has been violated. Alistair was baffled. What drainage agreement? Davies wrung his hands. The one they made with Her Grace, the Duchess. Alistair stared at him. The Duchess? Davies produced a sheaf of papers. She met with them, Your Grace, several times. She surveyed the land herself. She drew these. He unrolled a large map on the Duke's desk. It was a stunning piece of work, rendered with a draftsman's precision. It showed the entire valley, the streams, the fields, and a series of detailed annotations in Eleanor's neat hand, proposing a new system of culverts and ditches. It was accompanied by a report outlining costs, labor, and a projected timeline. It was a professional plan, more thorough than anything Davies himself had ever produced. Alistair looked from the map to the agent's worried face. I knew nothing of this, he said, the admission tasting like ash. She never mentioned it. Davies shifted his weight. She did not, Your Grace. She simply did it. The tenants trusted her. They said she was the first person from the great house who ever truly listened to their troubles. Now that she is gone, they fear the work will be abandoned. Alistair felt that sickening lurch again. This was not the work of a decorative object. This was the work of a master of the estate. An estate he thought he alone commanded. The unravelling had begun. He spent the rest of the day in his study, the map spread before him, a testament to a world of competence he had never bothered to look for in his own wife. He was the Duke of Blackwood, and he had been a blind fool. Dearest listeners, gentle viewers, thank you for joining us for this chapter in our story. It is a particular kind of pain, is it not, to realize you have misjudged someone so completely, to discover a world of hidden depth where you had only seen a placid surface. The Duke is at the beginning of a long and difficult education. If you are enjoying this journey, we would be so grateful if you would subscribe to our channel, or perhaps leave a comment below, telling us where in the world you are listening from. It brings us such joy to know where our stories find a home. Now, let us return to Blackwood Manor, where a man of great power is learning the true meaning of loss. The map was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Alistair began a quiet investigation, a forensic accounting of his wife's absence. He did not ask his sister, whose judgment he now profoundly distrusted. He did not ask his secretary, who saw Eleanor only as a signature on household orders. He went to the one person who had been a quiet witness to Eleanor's daily life, the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. He found her in the linen room, overseeing the mending of sheets. She was a woman of 60 who had been at Blackwood since she was a girl. Her face was a mask of professional calm, but her eyes held a deep, sorrowful knowing. You wished to see me, Your Grace? She asked, her hands not ceasing their work. Mrs. Gable, he began, feeling strangely like a supplicant. The Duchess, I am trying to understand. He gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the full scope of his ignorance. Mrs. Gable folded a sheet with practiced snaps of her wrists. "There is not much to understand, Your Grace. Her Grace was a good and capable woman. She saw what needed doing, and she did it." The simplicity of the statement was a quiet rebuke. "What did she do?" Alistair pressed. "Tell me what you saw." Mrs. Gable finally stopped her work and looked at him directly. "I saw her in the kitchens, learning the prices of flour and bacon, so that the suppliers would not cheat us. I saw her go to the village, not in the carriage but on foot, to speak with the wife of the mason whose son was ill. She arranged for the doctor from the town and paid for it herself, from her own pin money. She told me not to mention it. I saw her in the library until all hours, not with novels, Your Grace, but with books on crop rotation and architecture. And I saw her in the gardens, in all weather, with dirt on her hands and a look of peace on her face that she never had inside this house." Each sentence was a small, precise incision. Mrs. Gable then walked to a large cabinet and took out a wrapped bundle. "She asked me to give this to Mr. Thorne in the gardens, but perhaps you should see it first." Alistair unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside were several leather-bound journals. He opened the top one. It was filled with Eleanor's script, page after page of notes on the arboretum. There were sketches of leaves, notes on soil acidity, cross-references to botanical texts. It was the work of a scholar. And tucked into the back was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a list. A quiet piece of furniture. Below the quote, she had written 2 columns. One was headed Assets, the other Liabilities. Under Assets, she had listed her skills: cartography, estate management, minor; botany, amateur; accounting. Under Liabilities, there was only one entry: being Duchess of Blackwood. He closed the journal. The evidence was irrefutable. He had not just ignored his wife. He had actively misunderstood her to the point of absurdity. He had taken a woman of immense, quiet talent and seen only a pretty face in a silent room. He knew then that he could not send agents. He had to go himself. He had to find her, not to bring her back, but to see the woman he had never known. Mrs. Gable gave him one last piece of information, a parting gift of loyalty to her absent mistress. She spoke once of a cousin on the coast, a Mrs. Croft in Dorset. It was all he needed. The journey to Dorset took 2 days. Alistair travelled not as a duke with an entourage and a grand carriage, but as a private gentleman in a plain coach with a single valet. The landscape changed from the lush, ordered hills of his own lands to the wild, windswept coast. He felt like an explorer venturing into an unknown country, which, in a way, he was. He found the village, a clutch of stone houses huddled against the sea. He found the cottage of Mrs. Croft. It was small, respectable, and a world away from the grandeur of Blackwood. He disembarked, his heart pounding with an anxiety he had not felt in years. He knocked on the door. It was opened by a woman with kind, wary eyes. "May I help you?" "I am looking for a Mrs. Eleanor," he said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. He could not bring himself to use her title here. It had no meaning. Mrs. Croft's expression did not change, but a shutter seemed to come down behind her eyes. "And who is asking?" she said, her tone polite but firm. "My name is Alistair," he said simply. "I am her husband." The admission hung in the salt air between them. Before Mrs. Croft could reply, a voice came from the path leading up from the beach. "It is all right, Elspeth. I will speak with him." There she was. Eleanor. She was wearing a plain woolen dress. Her hair was tied back simply, and there was a smudge of what looked like ink on her cheek. She was carrying a satchel, and her boots were scuffed with sand. She was thinner, perhaps, but she stood straighter. The placid, almost vacant expression she had worn at Blackwood was gone. In its place was a calm, self-possessed authority. She looked at him with no surprise, no anger, just a quiet, appraising stillness. It was the look of a stranger. "Your Grace," she said, her voice even. "This is an unexpected visit?" The formal title was a wall between them. He, who had called her a piece of furniture, was now the one being held at a formal distance. The reversal was absolute, and it was devastating. "Eleanor," he said, his own voice sounding rough. "May I have a word?" She glanced at the sky, a cool assessment of the fading light. "Mr. Abernathy is expecting these proofs," she said, holding up a folder. "You may walk with me, if you wish." She did not wait for his answer, but turned and began walking down the path toward another cottage. He had come all this way, the powerful Duke of Blackwood, only to be granted a few moments of her time on her way to her work. He had no choice but to follow. The walk to Mr. Abernathy's cottage was less than a quarter of a mile, but it felt like the longest journey of Alastair's life. The silence between them was thick with everything unsaid. He, a man used to commanding conversations, found he had no words. What could he say? Come home? The arrogance of it choked him. I miss you? It was true, but it was a truth he had no right to speak. He looked at her profile as she walked, her gaze fixed ahead. She was not the woman he had married. Or rather, she was, and he had simply been too blind to see. "You are working," he said finally, stating the obvious. "Yes," she replied, her tone neutral. "I am an illustrator for Mr. Abernathy's Flora Dorsetiensis." She said it with a simple statement of fact, but he heard the pride beneath it. The pride of a woman who had a name for her work. They arrived at a cottage overflowing with books and drying plants. An elderly man with a magnifying glass looped around his neck opened the door. "Ah, Eleanor! You have the proofs for the Orchidaceae," he said, peering at her. His gaze then fell on Alastair, and his brow furrowed. "Who is this?" "This is the Duke of Blackwood, Mr. Abernathy," Eleanor said, her voice betraying nothing. "He is an acquaintance." An acquaintance. The word was another perfectly placed stone in the wall she was building between them. Alastair felt its impact. Abernathy grunted. "A duke, eh? Well, don't stand there blocking the light. Come in, Eleanor. Let's look at these." She gave Alastair a brief, dismissive nod. "I will be some time, Your Grace." She stepped inside, and the door closed, leaving him standing alone on the path as dusk settled over the sea. He had been dismissed. Politely, calmly, and completely. It was a precise mirror of the way he had treated her for 2 years. He stood there for a long time, the sound of the waves crashing on the shore the only answer to the turmoil in his heart. He did not go back to his coach. He went to the village inn, took a room, and waited. He did not know what he was waiting for, only that leaving was no longer an option. He had to stay. He had to understand. He stayed for a week in which he became a feature of the village landscape, the strange, silent gentleman from London who walked the cliff paths and watched the sea. He did not approach her again. He knew, with a certainty that was new to him, that words of command or persuasion were useless. He had to show, not tell. He learned her routine. She would leave her cousin's cottage in the morning, walk to Mr. Abernathy's, and return in the late afternoon. He saw her sometimes on the beach, sketching in a small notebook, her focus absolute. One afternoon, he saw her struggling to drag a large piece of driftwood up the beach, presumably for Mrs. Croft's fire. Without thinking, he went to her. She looked up, startled, as his shadow fell over her. "Allow me," he said, and before she could protest, he took the heavy log and carried it for her, all the way to the cottage's woodpile. He deposited it, nodded to her, and walked away without another word. It was a small, simple act of service. It was more communication that had passed between them in their entire marriage. The next day, a storm blew in, a furious gale that sent waves crashing over the sea wall. The innkeeper mentioned that the roof of Mrs. Croft's cottage had a loose slate, a perennial problem. Alistair, who had spent his youth climbing the trees and rooftops of Blackwood, saw his chance. He acquired a ladder and, in the driving rain, climbed onto the low roof. He found the loose slate and, using a hammer and nails he'd procured from the village blacksmith, secured it. He was soaked to the skin, his fine London coat ruined when he climbed down. Eleanor was standing at the door of the cottage, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching him. Her face was unreadable. "You will catch your death," she said. It was the first personal sentence she had spoken to him. "The slate is fixed," was all he said in reply. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why are you here, Alistair?" she asked, the use of his name a crack in the ice. He turned back to face her. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He had a grand speech prepared in his head, full of apologies and promises. But looking at her clear, steady gaze, he knew it was worthless. He gave her the only truth he had. "Because I was wrong," he said. That was the beginning. She did not invite him in, not yet. But the next day, as he walked his customary path, she was there, waiting for him. "Walk with me," she said. They walked in silence for a time, the sea a calmer, grey blue after the storm. "The tenants in the lower valley," she said, not looking at him. "The drainage." "I have instructed Davies to begin the work," he replied. "Using your plans. He said they were masterful." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "They are practical," she corrected. "Not masterful. The land has been suffering for a decade." "I did not see it," he admitted quietly. "There is a great deal I did not see." They walked on. "Mrs. Gable gave me your journals," he said. "About the Arboretum." She stopped and finally looked at him. "They were for Mr. Thorne." "I know," he said. "I read them. I saw the list." Her eyes flickered, the only sign of emotion he had seen. The list. Assets and liabilities. He saw a flash of pain, of humiliation in her gaze before she masked it. This was the moment. The apology could not be delayed any longer. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and earnest. "What you overheard, what I said to Beatrice in the library, there is no excuse for it. It was a cruel and stupid thing to say. But it was also a lie. A lie I told myself because I was a coward. After Annalise, I decided that feeling was a liability. I wanted a life without complication, without risk. I built a fortress and convinced myself it was a home. When you came to Blackwood, I refused to see you. I refused to know you, because to know you would be to feel something, and I was terrified of that. You were never furniture. You were a brilliant, capable, living woman, and I was too much of a fool to see it. The fault was not in you, Eleanor. It was entirely in me. I am sorry. He did not say he loved her. The words would have been cheap, unearned. He simply stated the truth of his failure. He stood before her, stripped of his title, his pride, his defenses, and waited for her judgment. Eleanor listened, her gaze never leaving his face. She searched his eyes for the slightest hint of artifice, of the smooth rhetoric of a man used to getting his way. She found none. She saw only a man hollowed out by a truth he had finally been forced to confront. The anger she thought she had buried, a cold, hard stone in her chest, had simply vanished, replaced by a vast, aching melancholy for the years they had lost, for the man he might have been, for the woman she had been forced to hide. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the cry of a distant gull. She had built a new life here, a small, quiet, honorable life. It was hers. She did not need him. But as she looked at him, drenched and humbled and stripped of all his ducal arrogance, she felt a flicker of something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Not love, not yet, but a possibility, a fragile shoot pushing its way through frozen ground. An apology does not change what was done, she said, her voice quiet but firm. No, he agreed. It does not. Only actions can do that. He reached into his coat pocket, and his hand emerged in a fist. He opened it. Lying in his palm was the single pearl earring. I believe this is yours, he said. It is incomplete. As was I. She looked at the pearl, then back at his face. She did not take it. What do you want, Alistair? She asked, the question direct and unsparing. He met her gaze. I want to earn the right to ask you to come home, he said. Not to the position you left, but to a partnership. To help me run Blackwood, not as a silent fixture, but as my equal. To have your maps on the wall of my study, to have your books on the table. To see you. I want to learn how to see you. She did not answer immediately. She turned and looked out at the sea, at the endless grey horizon. She had found her freedom here. To return was a risk. But to stay, she realized, might be the greater one. To deny the possibility of a shared future, a future built on the hard-won truth, would be its own kind of fortress. The drainage in the lower valley will need supervision, she said, her voice almost too low to hear. Mr. Davies is competent, but he does not understand the soil composition. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. It was the opening of a door, just a crack. It was a condition. It was a beginning. Alistair felt a surge of hope, so fierce it almost brought him to his knees. I will be there, he said. We will be there. She finally reached out and took the pearl from his palm. Her fingers brushed his, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of everything that had passed between them. She did not put it on. She simply closed her hand around it, a small, hard promise, and turned to walk back toward the cottage. He fell into step beside her, matching his stride to hers. The walk was silent, but it was a different silence now. It was not the absence of words, but the beginning of a shared understanding, as they walked together into the uncertain light of a new day.